It's Monday, and in today's episode of NUFC Transfer Daily, we're going to be discussing a shock low valuation for a potential winger target, an update on Alexander Isak's contract situation, and a potential new direction in the centre-back chase. Let's get into it. Hello, good morning. Welcome back to NUFC Transfer Daily for another week. Hope you had a great weekend. Thanks to everyone who's continued to support my channel and subscribe. If you haven't already, please do hit that like button. Today we're going to be looking at the future of Johan Bakayoko, who has been linked heavily in the right wing chase for Newcastle from PSV Eindhoven, Alexander Isak's contract situation, as well as a new direction, a very exciting potential direction for the centre-back chase. We'll start with Johan Bakayoko, who was reported over the weekend by the local Eindhoven media that PSV want just 20 million euros, 17 million pounds for the Belgian 22-year-old winger. And I think that that's the sort of deal that Newcastle really need to look at, because he's a player who is right in that sweet spot of the age profile that Newcastle want. That valuation is too difficult to ignore. The report went on to say that Brentford had bid 37 million for him 2 years ago, which PSV accepted, but he rejected the move. This is an opportunity I think he would look at because of Champions League football. 10 goal contributions in, I think, 30 games last season, which is down from 21 the previous year. I think he got 12 assists and 9 goals. I think he got 9 goals and 1 assist this season. So he's had a difficult season, but as we've seen in the past with Newcastle, Isak being a great example, that when the hype dies down around a player, but that there's quality there, that's when you strike. And this is an opportune moment for Newcastle. I think there'll be plenty of Premier League clubs and European clubs chasing him at that value. It doesn't look like he's going to sign a new contract, and that's why the report claims that he is so cheap, because his contract runs out at the end of next season. I really don't want Newcastle to miss this opportunity in a way that they seem to have with Jonathan David. He looks like he's going to go somewhere else because of his wage demands. That queue has got longer because he's free and there's more money you can spend on signing on fees and wages, whereas that demand won't be there for Bakayoko at this stage, because you've still got to factor in that PSV wants some money as well, and that money is way down on what his valuation is. He's a Belgian regular. He's a really, really talented player. You look at Jeremy Doku's development after coming in from the French league. I think he would have a similar sort of impact at Newcastle as well. We've been through his stats. He's very good at getting into the area and getting shots off, getting assists, getting the final ball in there, as well as taking his opponents on. But he's also crucially quite a physical specimen. He would definitely, is similar to what we were saying about Magnus Hakaliusz last week, he would definitely not struggle in the Premier League, which is a big factor for quite a few people when it comes to certain targets, and this idea that you need to be able to physically keep up with the Premier League, which I think is less of an issue now than it was maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. So, but either way, Bakayoko is available by the sounds of it for £17 million, which is a really, really, really cheap deal. Yes, he is coming from a lower league, and we've been through this with Trincao in that episode that I spoke about, him coming from Portugal, but his stats have been impressive, and this is a bad season for Bakayoko. 10 goal contributions. PSV won the league, most dramatic circumstances from Ajax at the end of the season, but he wasn't the star player that he was the previous year, when I think he thought he was going to get the move, having spoken to a couple of people close to him. So Newcastle have registered their interest in the past. They seriously looked at doing a deal, I think, in January, as we've spoke about on this channel before. But I think that there's a real opportunity to strike now, strike early, get to the front of that queue, because there's links with Arsenal. Brentford may well look back to go back in for him. If Ryan Mbeumo leaves, maybe they'd be more of a possibility. Bakayoko's been linked with Bournemouth as well as a replacement for Semenyo. And this is, again, the principle of what I'm talking about with Newcastle and their transfer targets. Newcastle have been linked with Mbeumo, have been linked with Semenyo, they've been linked with João Pedro and Elanga. All of those clubs would likely look at Bakayoko as a replacement for those players. And in a year or two, I'm pretty sure you'd have a high valuation on Bakayoko after he proves himself in the Premier League. Why not just take the little bit of a gamble And it's much less of a gamble than it was. At £17 million in this market, you're not going to find a better value deal than Bakayoko. I think he's really ready to take that next step. If you look at what happened to Cody Gakpo when he came from PSV to Liverpool, he's not the star man because I think Salah is, but he's really come into his own at Anfield and shown that he's definitely good enough for this level. He's definitely of this quality. And Bakayoko is the replacement for Gakpo at PSV. He's the next in line for that. And there's other players who've come from the Dutch league and particularly PSV and thrived. Gini Wijnaldum joined Newcastle, scored 11 goals, went on to Liverpool to become a real mainstay in that team. So don't look just at the sort of reputation of the Dutch league. I think of the context of the player and the fact that he's so much ahead of everybody else in terms of quality in that league. I mean, 21 goal contributions last season, only 10 this year, and I say only 10. I mean, the fact that, as I say, he's very mouldable, he's still in that age group, it feels like the right deal. Newcastle have looked at this before. I think his valuation was probably around 25 million, 30 million in January. I think PSV have given up hope on him signing a new contract. I think he has made it clear that he's ready for that next step. And Newcastle seems ideally placed. He's perfect. Again, another of those perfect solutions in terms of left footer on the right-hand side, different to Elanga, different to João Pedro. Those are the issues I have with those players, and especially when you're looking at paying upwards of 50 million. It's such a surprise to hear that is the low ball evaluation that PSV have, but that's the reality of European football at the moment, and that's the reality when a player doesn't want to sign a new contract. We've been told this by Steve Caldwell about Jonathan David. Once a player makes that clear in those sort of lesser financially stable European leagues, there's very little that the clubs can do, and they know that they have an asset. As I say, they valued him at around the same that Liverpool paid for Cody Gakpo a couple of years ago when Brentford came calling, and I would have happily have paid that at the time as well. I think he's been a real star. He's got he had 10 goal contributions before last season as well. So yeah, absolutely ready to go in my opinion. This is a deal that I implore Newcastle to go and chase because it solves that issue straight away and also probably leaves a little bit of money for maybe another player on that side. Maybe you could go and get Bakayoko and João Pedro. Maybe you could go and get somebody else as well in a higher, another midfielder, another position. It would make the Trafford deal easier to do. It would make a centre-back easier to get. It would solve a lot of problems. Newcastle have quite a bit of money to spend. We're not quite sure how much, but they have quite a bit to spend this summer. And this is a real opportunity to go and find one of those bargain deals, one of those opportunities to strike that I think they made clear that they were capable of a couple of years ago. If you look at people like Sven Botman being 32 million, obviously he's been injured a lot, but you would say he's at least valued at double that. Alexander Isak is over double what Newcastle paid at £63 million. Sandro Tonali is probably worth £150 million as well. Anthony Gordon, there's been more talks of Liverpool this week, 80 to 100 million. That's what Newcastle can get out of Bakayoko, but on a much bigger scale, because £17 million, if that report is true, and there's no reason to believe that it isn't, because it's emanating from the local Eindhoven press, who will have very good sources, I'm absolutely certain. So I think this one is definitely a possibility if Newcastle are awake to it. And there's been lots of talk about the fact that those European targets haven't been named over the last few weeks, and lots of these reports coming out that Newcastle have made moves for domestic targets, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not looking at European players who just haven't been named. We do know that Newcastle like Bakayoko. We've spoken about him on the channel before. Let me know in the comment section if you think that Newcastle should make this move, but for me, this is the type of opportunity that I implored them to go and chase with Jonathan David. They could really go and do this again with Bakayoko and get a ready-made, really impressive right winger almost through the back door effectively. But yeah, as I say, let me know in the comment section what you think. So building on the talk of European targets, and it's emerged through Luke Edwards in the Telegraph that Newcastle do have European targets, and one of them that he named was Ousmane Diomande from Sporting Lisbon, who's a centre-back that Newcastle have scouted for quite a while. Everybody knows how much of a fan I am of him. He's perfectly suited in terms of the right age, again 21, Champions League experience, very good on the ball, very sort of decent pace, but crucially he's a different type of centre-back than what Newcastle have in terms of his pace and his height, his power. He would suit Newcastle down to the ground, and he was linked, we spoke about last week, linked with Crystal Palace as a potential replacement for Guéhi, perhaps Newcastle will make that move and go for Diomande instead. As I say, lots of talk that Newcastle are looking for other players around Europe that haven't been named. They've scouted him extensively. We have spoken about him before. I don't think that the interest is quite as defined as it was perhaps in Bakayoko in January, but certainly this is a option that I think Newcastle should take. Lots of questions about Guéhi's height and his ability in the air. That's certainly not an issue with Diomande. You probably cost, I think he's got a £50 million release clause in his contract, and the point I was making in his in the video I made last year was that that's still better value than what Crystal Palace are chasing for Marc Guéhi. I'm not sure that's now the case, given that Guéhi's got a year in his contract. That price might well come down. But the fact that this deal is on the table and Newcastle are interested, it would make so much more sense to me, because he's got 3 years on Guéhi. He's got the perfect height. You can see the sort of development that they had with Botman happening again with Diomande, and the pair of them would be absolutely perfect at the back for Newcastle. As I say, crucially, Champions League experience. He's played at the very top level for Sporting Lisbon, won titles, and again, he really fits that bill. Do you remember what I said a couple of weeks ago about how much further money goes in Europe in terms of that mentality? Yes, Marc Guéhi's played for England. Yes, Marc Guéhi has won the FA Cup. But if Crystal Palace aren't playing ball at the right price, 35 to 40 million at the very, very most, I would absolutely look elsewhere. And I think you could get 10, 12 years out of Diomande at that price. Be probably roughly, I think you could do a deal for £40 million here. That would be the top end. I don't think you'd have to pay the release clause, which for me makes more sense than Marc Guéhi, because his wages will be cheaper. It'll be an easier deal to do. There's none of that Newcastle tax. Newcastle are getting frustrated by the consistent talk of upping the price. I think if you look abroad, you find better deals, and Ousmane Diomande is absolutely perfect for Newcastle. I think he's the ideal centre-half. Let me know in the comment section if you agree, but if Newcastle are to move for Ousmane Diomande as an alternative to Marc Guéhi, I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. And one of the final things to touch on quickly is Alexander Isak. Again, Luke Edwards saying that talks over a new contract are going to start in July. I think Newcastle will be able to sign to a new deal if they promise to put a release clause in there. I think I've spoken about this before. It's very, very difficult to see Isak signing a new contract without some sort of incentive, because Newcastle's wage structure, although they will probably break it to sign Isak to a new contract, as we've spoken about before, that'll only go up to £200,000 a week. If you look at that and compare that to Liverpool signing Florian Wirtz, Carve Solokol on Sky was saying that Liverpool's wage structure just fits Wirtz in the middle, and he's going to be earning around £250,000 a week. So what can Newcastle offer? I'm not saying that Isak will want to leave, but if that's what Newcastle are up against, why in some ways would he sign a new contract without some sort of incentive of a release clause, or some reason to maybe say that you can go, you've got an easy route out if you want it in the future? Because that wage structure, that guarantee of playing in the Champions League and that possibility of winning titles at Liverpool, just as an example, is very enticing. It's something that Newcastle can't really offer at this stage at the moment. So we'll see how that goes. But talks with Isak are going to start in July apparently, and it feels like I think he will sign a new contract. But to me, it may need a release clause, a little bit like Bruno, and I would try and make that happen for foreign clubs so he doesn't sign for a Premier League rival in the future. But to me, it feels like the new contract is more about protecting value for Newcastle rather than actually keeping Isak for the long term, because even though Newcastle are on an upward trajectory, I think he's already at that level required to win titles and play at the very, very top that Newcastle just can't match at this moment. Again, let me know in the comment section if you agree. I'm not saying that he won't sign a new contract. I'm not saying it's all doom and gloom. But the reality of signing Florian Wirtz and putting him sort of not even at the very, very top of Liverpool's wage structure, the wage that's sort of well clear of what Newcastle can offer Isak, that kind of sort of spells out the reality of the situation for Newcastle, I think. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode. Today, later, I'm going to be writing a piece on Will Asula, because there's been lots of talk about how his form at the Under-21 Euros is maybe changing things for Newcastle with a striker chase. I'm going to give my thoughts on that, and that's going to be coming out later today. And there's a piece on BBC Sport tomorrow analysing Newcastle's transfer situation and what I think might happen and the current state of play. So check that out as well. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Like, share and subscribe, as I say, and I'll see you tomorrow.